What if I told you that McLaren, the same team that won the Constructors' Championship with a philosophy of equality and fair play, has just buried its own legacy for protecting a single driver? What if that decision not only fractures the team from within, but also jeopardizes everything they've built so far? Today I'll tell you how Lando Norris and McLaren just left Oscar Piastri completely exposed, and why this scandal could change the course of the 2025 season. What came after the incident in Singapore was not just a routine check. It was a surgical operation, a desperate internal search to understand what had gone wrong, how a team that had dominated the Constructors' Championship with authority had allowed its internal unity to break down at one of the most sensitive moments of the year. McLaren decided not to sweep the problem under the rug. Or at least that's what he tried to show the world. The investigation began immediately. Review of telemetry, analysis of onboard cameras, comparison of radios of both pilots. Every millisecond was examined with a magnifying glass. And the verdict was as unexpected as it was historic. McLaren found Lando Norris guilty of contact with Piastri. This was neither a shared mistake nor an ambiguous racing incident. It was a clear responsibility attributed to their star driver, who until then had been publicly protected by the team structure. Because the punishment, although announced with great fanfare, was symbolic. According to paddock sources, the real consequences came down to giving Piastri priority in choosing the pit exit order in Q3. A technicality. A gesture. Something that hardly repairs the emotional and competitive damage suffered by the Australian. It was like applying a band-aid to an open fracture. And everyone knew it. The reaction from the press and former pilots was immediate. Timo Glock, without going any further, openly criticized the team for airing a sanction without real consequences. If you are going to make a decision, make it firmly. The opposite is showing weakness and increasing distrust among your own men, he said. And he was right. What McLaren did was open a process without having the courage to apply forceful justice. But the real low blow for Piastri came days later, when the team, almost silently, canceled the sanctions imposed on Norris. The official reason? A supposed mutual understanding between pilots and management. In other words, McLaren backed down. He once again prioritized internal diplomacy over technical coherence. And with this, he made it clear that the initial message was just a facade. For Oscar Piastri, this was an emotional turning point. Not because he expected a public revenge or humiliation for his partner, but because he understood, irrefutably, that the team was willing to soften any measure so as not to inconvenience its most media asset, Lando Norris. What began as an attempt at balance ended up being a renunciation of the principle of equity. And this is where the new evidence left new wounds. Because beyond the technical analysis of the incident, what was revealed was the lack of firm direction within the team. The inability to make tough decisions when the championship demands it. Every driver needs to know that when there is a fault, there will be consequences. That internal justice does not depend on popularity or media impact. That there is a clear framework. What McLaren showed was the opposite. These wounds are not visible to the naked eye. They do not appear in the broken wing, nor in the points lost on the track. They are reflected in the body language of the pilots, in future strategic decisions, in the level of trust with the wall. Once a pilot stops trusting that his team will protect him, support him and treat him fairly, the relationship breaks down. And when that happens in the middle of a world title fight, the consequences are not just internal. They are catastrophic. McLaren may have contained the scandal publicly, but privately it has sown a seed of doubt that could germinate at the worst moment. Because in Formula One, unresolved wounds always end up bleeding, and almost always at the most critical moment. The real problem for a dominant team is not winning. It's knowing how to maintain control when everything starts to fall apart from within. And that is precisely the scenario that McLaren faces at the moment. What until a few months ago was a solid, compact block, structured with British precision, today seems a fragile structure, where each decision can be the movement that causes a chain collapse. McLaren is not just any team. They are the defending Constructors' Champions, the team that managed to end Red Bull's era of absolute dominance. But that crown, which in 2024 seemed like a promise of a dynasty, now weighs like a burden. Because it is no longer just about maintaining the technical advantage, but about managing a broken internal team, where tensions between its two-star drivers have gone from the strategic to the personal. And in modern Formula One, these types of conflicts are not only paid in points. They are paid in lost titles. Oscar Piastri is not a second pilot. He is one of the most talented and consistent young people on the entire grid. His ability to extract the most from the car, his coolness under pressure and his near-perfect learning curve have made him a legitimate title contender. And paradoxically, that same consistency is what has begun to bother certain sectors within the team. Because while Norris is the public's favorite, the face of the team, the natural ambassador of the brand, Piastri is the one who has delivered the most results with the least fanfare. The imbalance in internal management has become evident, and that directly affects the work dynamic. The engineers begin to take sides. Strategic decisions are beginning to be suspect. And the worst, the pilots stop collaborating. They no longer share data like before. They no longer build the development of the single-seater with a common vision. Everything becomes a hidden competition, a silent civil war. And the most serious thing of all is that this happens at the worst possible moment. Because while McLaren is consumed inside, Max Verstappen has returned. The Dutchman, freed from Red Bull's internal dramas and refocused after a turbulent start to the season, has begun to close the gap. He has already won in China and Japan, and now only 1 point separates him from the lead of the championship. He doesn't need McLaren to fail on the track. It is enough for them to destroy themselves. And that is exactly what is happening. Added to this is a factor that should not be underestimated: external pressure. The media, the sponsors, the analysts, everyone is starting to notice the cracks. The narrative has changed. McLaren is no longer the ascendant team with a modern philosophy. Now it is the team that refuses to make difficult decisions, that prioritizes image over results, that preaches equality while executing favoritism. And when that happens, the morale of the entire group begins to collapse. Because if the pilots feel that there is no internal justice, the engineers, mechanics, and strategists perceive it too. A toxic work environment is generated, where every error is amplified and every success is ignored if it comes from the wrong pilot. Efficiency drops. Trust disappears. The team's energy is divided between competing against rivals and surviving internal disputes. McLaren is at a crossroads. You can correct course, close ranks, and prioritize team victory over individuality. Or you can continue to navigate ambiguity, clinging to a philosophy that has already proven unsustainable when playing in the big leagues. Because at this stage of the championship, you can't be everything to everyone. You have to choose. You have to have the courage to make decisions that make you uncomfortable. You have to be a leader. If McLaren does not act now, what they will lose will not just be the driver's title. It will be the credibility that cost them so much to rebuild after years in the shadows. They will be victims not of the competition, but of themselves. Because in Formula One, the titans do not fall due to the force of their rival. They fall when they stop believing themselves invincible. And McLaren is dangerously close to crossing that threshold. McLaren still has room. But that margin is no longer on the track. He's in the meeting room. In the decisions made within the team in the coming weeks. Because what is at stake is no longer just a championship, but the very structure of a project that seemed destined to mark an era. What comes next will define not only the 2025 season, but the legacy of this generation of McLaren. To begin, it is necessary to understand an uncomfortable truth. The season is not yet lost. McLaren leads the Constructors' Championship. Norris remains at the top of the Drivers' World Championship. And Piastri, with a relatively short lead, is completely in the fight. At a pure performance level, the MCL39 remains the most complete car on the grid. Its efficiency on high-load circuits, its aerodynamic balance, its tire management in variable conditions, all that is still there. The problem is not technical, it's human, and because of that, it can still be reversed. But to achieve this, an immediate restructuring of internal leadership is needed. Zak Brown and Andrea Stella must abandon the rhetoric of neutrality. It is no longer viable to sustain the story of equality between drivers when one has been repeatedly favored directly or indirectly at key moments. If McLaren really wants to save the season, it has to do what it has so far avoided: define a clear hierarchy. That doesn't mean punishing Norris or stopping Piastri, but rather establishing roles that benefit the team as a whole. Roles that fit the moment of the championship, not commercial commitments or brand marketing. And that definition can't wait for Verstappen to catch up to them. Because if Red Bull manages to match the performance in the coming dates and they are trying to do so with aggressive updates to their RB21, then McLaren will have wasted their strategic advantage. The difference will no longer be gained in tenths per lap. It will be won in brave decisions made from the wall. What happened between Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and McLaren has revealed not only a specific conflict, but a series of tensions that can no longer be hidden behind diplomatic statements or idealistic structures. This story, which began with a simple incident on the track, has escalated to become a case study in how a team can put its own future at risk by not wanting to face uncomfortable decisions. And now, the question is on the table. What would you do if you were in charge? Do you think McLaren has deliberately favored Lando Norris, or is Piastri misinterpreting the situations? Who should lead the team for the remainder of the season? Does McLaren need a profound change in its philosophy, or is it possible to rebuild the relationship and maintain equality without compromising results? Let me know in the comments what you think of all this.